Welcome to All Creatives Now, a brand new one-stop creativity spot where you can find all the information and resources you need to unleash your creative potential.
Looking at the growth in the creator economy and facilitating conversations amongst creatives about what it is to be a creator in the modern world.
Join me, Paul Stevenson,
And me, Kev Harrison,
as we interview creatives from a range of disciplines about their journeys, their passions, their struggles, and what it means to them to be a creative in the modern world. There has quite literally never been a better time to be a creative.
Get your work out there into the world.
Hello and welcome back to All Creatives Now. This is the podcast about creativity, the podcast about creativity. There aren't any other ones, so don't bother looking for them because this is all you need. I am Paul Stevenson, and I am joined, as always, by my glorious co-host, Kev Harrison. Kev, how you doing?
Hello there. How are you? Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, I've had a little summer break. Well, we've had a summer break, haven't we?
Yes.
As the autumn air is flowing in my window, I'm feeling inspired. I'm feeling refreshed. I'm feeling good to go and good to do some creative stuff. How about you?
Well, this is the advantage for you of being in Portugal because you open your window and you get nice autumnal air. If I open my window right now, I'll get wet. So I'm not going to do that. And that
Fair
is
enough.
Yeah. So no, I'm good. I've had a very, very nice break, and I have returned refreshed and ready to get back to being a creative, to doing this podcast, doing all sorts of
To
bits and
learning
pieces.
from other creatives.
Indeed. So, Kev, who are we learning from this week?
Oh my God. We are learning from someone who I have so much time for, someone I admire an awful lot as a horror writer, as a writer in general, actually, because it isn't all exactly just horror, really, with her. It's Gemma Amor. The amazing author of, Bram Stoker Award-nominated author of Dear Laura, also of 6 Rooms, and coming out a week today,
Full Immersion on Angry Robot
Yes.
Books. Yes, absolutely. She's making the step up to the big time, and it's a thoroughly deserved one.
Absolutely right.
I echo Kev's sentiments. She's, I think, definitely one of the most exciting voices in horror and in modern publishing, and just generally in creativity, actually, because she's been doing a lot of sort of talks and stuff around. She went after we'd spoken to her, she'd only just got back from America, where she'd been doing some talks and doing some stuff around some of the big festivals there as well. So yeah, an absolute megastar of horror, if not currently, then certainly in the future. And we were very,
No question.
very lucky to sit down with her for an hour. So it's quite a long chat, and we covered an awful lot of areas. Gemma opened up, quite frankly, about some of the difficulties in writing Full Immersion, but also just around her creative journey, and some of the different things she's done, because she's done a lot of work with audio and stuff. It was really interesting interview, and she's got an awful lot in there that are good takeaways for any creative. So without further ado, we should probably crack on and listen to that interview. As I say, it's a long one, so we won't bore you too much with our waffle to begin with. So yeah, without further ado, here's our chat with Gemma Amor.
Enjoy.
So, welcome to another episode of All Creatives Now. We are very happy to be joined today by the multi-talented author, podcaster, artist, and all-round good human being, Gemma Amor. So, Gemma, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So before we kind of get into talking about your new book, which is Full Immersion, which is coming out soon from Angry Robot, obviously we're a show about creativity. Oh, look at that. You can hold that up as many times as you like. If you want to just keep holding it up every couple of minutes as kind of a subliminal advertising, that's fine. We kind of do the same anyway. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into writing?
Okay, so yes, I'm Gemma. I have been writing. I guess I've been writing all of my life, pretty much since I was old enough to kind of read and understand that I loved books and I loved the world of writing and losing yourself in a good story. And I'd say probably since I was about 10 or 11, I've been scribbling in diaries or writing stories or trying to write books of various different descriptions. But as you sort of get older and you get a social life and a job, it's very difficult when you work, as you probably know, to dedicate yourself entirely to something. So it was always kind of a hobby for me. I I spent many years trying desperately to finish a novel and never quite managing it. My brain was sort of tend to hop from project to project, depending on how tired I was or whatever. Um, and then, but I knew I had this burning passion to write and to create, and I always have been a very creative person. And I grew up an only child. I have siblings, but I grew up sort of just me and my mum, and spent a lot of time by myself. And I think one of the ways I dealt with that was just by making things. So, kind of fast forward to my mid 30s, I kind of I found myself unemployed. Um, Having been fired from 2 jobs in a row, which was no great loss when I think about it. Um, I was in a very bad spot. Had some quite profound mental health issues, and my son turned schooling age. So all of a sudden, I also had an abundance of time on my hands. I feel like I tell this story a lot, and I'm always really worried that I'll say something different. And then, and I just found myself suddenly needing a routine that was good for my brain. So I would get into the habit of dropping my kid off at school and then walking to a nearby cafe where I still spend a lot of time. And I would stay there and I would write from sort of 9 until 1, pretty much 5 days a week, every day, if I could, on
Wow.
the weekends, if I was allowed to. But it's hard when you've got a kid. And before I knew it, I was just writing habitually and through habit and through routine. Um, and I was working on a book which eventually became Full Immersion, although I didn't know it would be at the time. So this is, you know,
So
um,
this was your first, like, really disciplined project.
first discipline project, but it
Ah,
wasn't the first project that I completed. So what happened was that I brain dumped an awful lot of things and experiences that I needed to work through and sort out in my head, and a lot of traumas and feelings and emotions. But it was a big messy manuscript which was essentially word vomit,
okay.
and it didn't really mean anything to anybody, and it wouldn't have been something that any publisher or reader would have been vaguely interested in. At the same time that I was writing that, which was I was purely really writing for myself as a kind of therapeutic technique, I suppose, which is quite ironic in the context of the book. um, I discovered podcasts, which I'd never really come across before. So one of the downsides to having a quite severe mental health problem was that I was finding it very, very hard to read anything. I could write no problem, but I couldn't really take anything in very easily. My brain wasn't able to absorb. So I turned to sort of audiobooks and podcasts, and that helped me because it gave me something. It meant I was still ingesting stories in the way that I needed to, without the frustration of staring at a page and my eyes kind of, battering around all over the place. So
Mm.
I came across a very well known fiction podcast called The Black Tapes. And Paul Bay, who's an extremely nice chap, I think he now sort of has segued into television, um, was talking about another podcast called the No Sleep Podcast, which is a horror anthology show where every episode there's about 5 stories, narrated by kind of professional voice actors and with a lovely musical score and sound effects.
Yeah.
It didn't start out that way. It started out with just the showrunner David, I think, on a laptop in his bedroom. But
As do all the best shows.
as all the best podcasts do, right?
Yeah.
And originally, the stories were pulled from a very well-known subreddit called the No Sleep subreddit, and they were all a sort of similar type of tale because there are lots of rules and regulations about stories you can post to that subreddit. But then in season 3, when it sort of started to take off, they opened up for submissions, and I came along at season 10. So I caught up, I found out that they were accepting submissions, and I thought, you know what? I'll try my luck. So I sat down, I wrote a short story about a mad scientist who opens a portal to hell in his suburban terraced house in the middle of Bristol. And I sent it, and it taught me 2 things. It taught me how to finish something, which up until that point, however 30 odd years, well, perhaps 20 odd years that I'd been writing, I'd never been able to finish anything, not even the manuscript that I was sitting down and writing every day. I finished a short story, and the act of finally finishing something unlocked like a new level of writer in me. And then the second thing was, if you don't submit, then you don't know what's going to happen, if that makes sense. And I submitted the story and they accepted it. When I think about it, it wasn't even really that good a story, not by my standards, but they liked it and they produced it. And then I built up a very good relationship with them quite quickly. And before I knew it, I had enough short stories to bring out a collection called Cruel Works of Nature, which the podcast was then very good in promoting, and it helped me find a small and rather loyal readership base. And the rest is kind of history, I guess. That it sort of set me on a path that has been an enormous roller coaster and has taken me to places and experiences like beyond like wildest dreams. And I'm so lucky and fortunate. Well, luck and fortune, but also if you don't submit, then you don't know what will happen. So
Absolutely. Yeah. There was a question actually I was going to ask a bit later, perhaps, but I think probably now's a good time to come to it. With you writing for audio in those early stages, quite a bit, like, did that inform your prose writing anyway? Did it kind of like sort of help you to sharpen any specific skills that you think might be useful for other writers to think about?
Well, it's funny because when I first started writing for No Sleep, I didn't really know how to write for audio. You learn quickly. They narrate things, so it's a straight narration, so it's not the same as writing an audio script. But I then quickly learned and got into writing audio scripts, and I've written audio scripts for that show, for other shows, for my own show, for live shows specifically, because No Sleep tour and writing a live script is a different kettle of fish altogether. But when you're writing a story that's to be narrated by somebody like No Sleep, one of the things I quickly learned to do was think about soundscapes when you're writing. And I mean, I'm quite a cinematic person anyway in the way I write. A lot of my prose is quite sensory, if that makes sense. Like I'm always thinking about the surroundings and the way something looks or smells or tastes or feels. I think that's just good writing anyway, to kind of color your prose with as much of that stuff as you can. But yeah, you definitely, if your story is going to be on a podcast, you definitely need to think about things that spice it up a little bit for the listener. So you can go into lovely detail about particular bodily injuries because you know there might be a squishy sound effect, or you can set it on the coast because you know there might be lovely seaside noises.
Sure.
The other thing you need to think about, although again not so much with straight narration but with audio scripts, exposition is a massive consideration. With an audio script, you don't particularly want to hammer somebody with tons and tons and tons of descriptive prose because the listener will zone out. So you have to find other ways of doing it. So Calling Darkness, the podcast I worked on with S.H. Cooper and a bevy of lovely ladies, is a really good example where we had, the basic premise was 6 girls who accidentally summon a demon in an acting class, and by reading from a spooky book. And we wanted to fill it with lots of gags and lots of descriptions and make fun, poke fun at lots of horror tropes. But it was very, very difficult to do that in an engaging, funny way. When you think about exposition, how do you describe what's happening without boring the pants off the listener? So one of the ways around that was to have a narrator figure who sort of oversees everything from up above and can describe things to the listener without it being a kind of heavy, stodgy process. And that ended up being narrated by Kate Siegel and from Haunting of Hill House, etc., who is the most enormously funny lady. And her outtakes had me in stitches, and it worked really well. So yeah, you do learn a lot of lessons.
It's a very funny show.
Thank you. Cooper's working on season 2. I've stepped down.
I've heard this,
Yeah, I had to step down from writing duties because of just workload, but I'll still be in it. and then we'll see what's happened. I think we're about to move it over to a different hosting platform as well. So
Okay, cool.
yeah. So to answer your question, writing for audio hasn't informed the way I write. Rather, I have to adapt the way I write to suit the medium.
Gotcha.
But I am quite a auditory and visual writer anyway. And in a lot of my books, things like music will slip in, like my favorite song or whatever I was listening to at the time. Or I'm very, very drawn to environments and settings and descriptions of locality and things like that in my work.
Cool.
So yeah.
Very good, thank you.
And that first collection, then you put that out yourself, didn't you? As sort of indie published, self-published, however you want to put it. And I know you've sort of been, you've definitely been one of the voices within the horror community that's been, quite positive about self-publishing and indie publishing. But then I know you've also then moved on to work with small presses, and now working with Angry Robot, who are one of the biggest names in the business. So, how have you sort of approached that as a, as a route forward? And do you still think you'd ever put anything out under your own label again, or?
So there's a couple of parts to that question. The first thing is that Cruel Works was actually originally published with a very small indie publisher called Haunted House Press, I think. Was essentially just one guy with an Amazon account. So it wasn't self-published by me, but I think it still counts as self-publishing. It didn't take me long for me to realize that with the best will in the world, everything that publisher was doing, I could pretty much figure out how to do myself. So there was no malice in it. It was all very amicable. I simply asked for the rights to my book back, and it was granted. And then I set about republishing it under my own account on Amazon. And it was really a case of, for me at the time, the most important thing was to make the most of the fact that I had listeners through No Sleep that I knew would be interested in buying the book. I knew it wasn't in me to go through the querying trenches of trying to get a literary agent. I knew I wasn't ready. I knew my writing wasn't ready. I knew I couldn't bear the idea of like 500 rejections on manuscripts before somebody paid attention to what I was doing. For me, the better route was to get my work out there as quickly as possible and then focus on promoting it and building, I guess, an online sort of, not brand, I hate that word, but like presence as quickly as possible. And it didn't take long for people to start paying attention to the book. And I think that for me made me realize that, barriers to entry into writing are some of the things that troubled me the most in publishing, and particularly when you think of marginalized voices who perhaps don't get the look in and the attention that they deserve, or let's say you are dyslexic or you have a disability, or you don't have it feels wrong to me that getting a book published always was as long and painful a process as it has been. And if I was to be doing what I'm doing now kind of 10, 15 years ago, which I wasn't ready for, but I wouldn't have stood a chance. Like, I wouldn't have stood a chance. Like, no publisher would have been interested in me at all. I didn't have the patience for that. I thought, fuck it. I could do it myself. And I think that's the biggest thing that I try and tell people wherever possible without compromising quality. I mean, there is a definite argument for you need to take yourself seriously. You need to take your work seriously. You need to present it properly. And I'm quite meticulous about that. And I'm quite lucky that I have a background in marketing and English and, But why the fuck not? It's there. It's free. You can just sign up to Amazon. Just publish your own fucking book. It's a brilliant learning experience, if nothing else. It's quite a humbling experience. It's just something I knew was right for me at the time. As my kind of, I guess my reputation grew, people liked the work that I was doing, and as my relationship with No Sleep developed, and with other people in the community, indie publishers started taking note, and I was approached by Cemetery Gates Media to write a story for them, which I did, and then that sort of opened up a lovely relationship with a publisher who quite often comes to me with ideas, and I just write them for them. What I will say is I'm very aware again of how fortunate I am. Many of the stages of my journey have been, they've sort of presented themselves to me rather than me actively kind of going after them, if that makes sense. I have to be careful how I phrase that so it doesn't sound like I'm bragging or being egotistical, but I have been lucky enough that I was approached by an agent, that I was approached by a traditional publisher, and that isn't how it normally works. I'm very aware of that. Um, but what I would say is I don't think those people would have approached me had I not been as actively engaged online as I have been. And I deliberately spent the first kind of 2 years of my career not only writing as much as I possibly could and learning as much as I could, but just being as active on social media as I could. And I think it paid off. So
I was
yeah,
going to say, like, the writing is not to be like understated here as being like very important part of that process as well. Like,
yeah,
you're
but
also writing fucking awesome literature as well.
But
Yeah.
I've also written a lot of terrible stuff as well, right? And it's only through doing it all the time and consistently doing it and learning about yourself and your own voice and learning different techniques and learning what other people do and surrounding yourself by creatives and a community that you grow as a person and as a writer. And I think that's all part of, again, the beautiful thing about self-publishing is you can get a book out there as quickly as possible and you can get feedback and readers will read it and tell you what they did and didn't like, and my god, will they tell you. And that's good for you. That's
Yeah,
a
it is.
good
It is. It is.
that's
Yeah.
it's good for you. It's a learning curve because
When the pain dulls, it's good.
yeah. And that's not to say you should take everything to heart. You have to take critique with a pinch of salt. But let's say if 6 of your stories in a row get the same critique of unlikable characters. Now, I have a real thing about this unlikable character thing, but that's a different question. Then it might be time to think about, perhaps I should perhaps think about that a little bit, and maybe this person does need softening up, or it's that's the unlikable character thing isn't a very good example because I don't understand why characters have to be likable in certain situations, but you know what I mean. There's things that you can get from having your books out there as quickly as possible.
Well, I think that's an important thing as well, is learning when to take feedback that comes back and makes you think, okay, yeah, that's something I need to change, and getting feedback that makes you think, no, I'm right,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and
exactly.
learning
Yeah, exactly.
to know when
Yeah.
that's the case. Yeah.
And that learning process is very much a part of establishing your identity as a writer and as an author, as well. And it's what's you quickly figure out, the more books you write, what's important to you, what your voice is, and what your readers like as well. And you shouldn't always pander to your readers. I try not to. Every book I try to write, I try to make it very, very different from the one that's gone before, because I don't want people to get comfortable. But you can only learn that and get in your stride by having stuff out there. And again, traditional publishing is very, very slow, and a debut author might not see any feedback on her book or his book or their book for years, after the point of it being accepted. So there's definite. I'm a huge proponent of self-publishing. I think it needs to be done properly and needs to be taken seriously. And there are lots of downsides, but there are with all aspects of publishing. So just to sort of continue that journey, I was self-published. I was getting interest from indie publishers, and then I was approached by a traditional publisher who asked me if I had any novel-length projects. And if we are to go full circle, I started to think about the manuscript that I wrote when I first started out in 2018, when I was unemployed, sitting in a cafe, dealing with a lot of trauma and shit. And I started to think about it, and I thought I could turn this into something quite special, I think. That's going to be the book that I send to them. So then I sat down, I went back over the manuscript. I thought about how to transform it from a pool of word vomit into a structured, interesting novel. And I sent it to them, and they said yes. And then once I had the offer, I was able to use that to negotiate getting a literary agent. So I did everything back to front and arse about face.
But it's all working out, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, doesn't seem to be working too badly for you at the moment, so that's
No,
good.
it's not. I'm very fortunate. Yeah.
Right. Very good.
Carry on, Kev.
Sorry, man. Sorry. I was just thinking about what you were saying about like your social media presence being kind of like quite integral to you growing your like presence and your present, using the same word, but you know what I mean.
I like
sort
presents.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've seen a lot of authors and a lot of creatives say like, you never sell anything through being online, and so on. It's all about like, buying ads on Amazon and this kind of business. So I mean, obviously your experience is quite different to that. What has been like your weapon of choice, as it were, as far as social media goes? And like, how do you think that has helped you to sort of like grow your career?
I'm really glad you asked this question because it's going to allow me to air a grievance that I have.
Let's go.
Only a slight gripe, but so I was fortunate enough to speak on a couple of panels at the recent ChillaCon, which was in Scarborough a couple of weeks back. And one of the panels was talking about indie publishing. And one of the points that I was trying to make as an author is it doesn't matter how you're published, either yourself or your publisher, indie or traditional or otherwise, expects you and encourages you to have a very active and healthy online presence. It's part and parcel of the gig. A lot of people don't like it. Unfortunately, if you want people to read your book, then unless you are Stephen King and unless you are with somebody with an enormous marketing budget who can do all that stuff for you, you don't have the privilege really of saying, I don't want to promote my own stuff. I mean, you don't have to. There's a lot to be said for staying away from social media particularly if you struggle with it. And I know I do, and there's a lot to be said for focusing on the work. But if you're starting out or your profile isn't that high, then how else are people going to read your lovely words unless they know about them? So I was making this point on a panel, and question time came at the end from the audience, and there was an audience member who, when somebody always starts with, this isn't a question, but, and you're like, oh, okay, fine. There's something I've learned about panels is that sometimes people want to be on the panel. And he proceeded to sort of educate the audience on how social media was an incredibly complex and scientific thing that was, authors shouldn't beat themselves up if they couldn't do it, which I do agree with. It's an art and it's a science and it takes years and it's bullshit. It is. I'm sorry. It's. I know this because my entire career has come from my efforts on social media, and it isn't that complicated. There's several key ingredients. Be yourself, as long as you're not being a dick. Be as authentic and genuine as you can. Just if you are a certain way. I say this to other people. What is the thing about you that your friends love? Just do that. Do that online. If you're funny, if you're knowledgeable, if you're a bit nerdy, if you have an interest in holograms shaped like cats, whatever. Just whatever's your thing, right? Just do that. Do it consistently. Do it regularly. And don't just promote your own shit. Try and engage in a community where you hold other people up, support other people, and before you know it, it just becomes habitual.
Yeah.
And it is that simple. It is genuinely that simple. And the idea that there's an intricate science to it it just means that you haven't figured it out, mate. It just means that you're not doing it. I didn't say that on the panel, but I'm really glad I have an opportunity to kind of vent, because it was quite interesting that question was aimed at the youngest woman on the panel, and not at any of the other panel members. So there's a perception and a fear around social media that pervades, I think, perhaps from some people not fully understanding how accessible and easy it is.
Yeah.
There's also a very legitimate concern that you'll fuck up and say the wrong thing, which we've all seen happen to various different people. My light on, dark. But it is it's trial and error to a certain extent. I personally try and keep my own feed centered mostly around my work and my journey as a writer and my experiences. but also I try and keep it light. I try and keep it funny. I try and keep it supportive. I will occasionally talk about things that are political or topical if I feel like I can add to the discourse. Often I don't feel like my voice is needed or necessary at that particular time, and I don't want to add to a general mess of noise. It's just I sort of curate the space I want to be in, the things that make me happy. I just do that online and it seems to work. Like, why overcomplicate it? Just consistency and being yourself.
And do you find that Twitter is where you get the most sort of engagement, or is it?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's hard to say whether it affects book sales directly, but 90% of my work opportunities, my connections, my the doors that have opened for me because of my being on Twitter and actively engaging on there. And I won't lie, it's the reason I am where I am today.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you do so often hear that thing, don't you, if Twitter doesn't sell books, and that might be right, but that's not necessarily the only thing that a writer ever has to do is sell copies of that individual book. That's
and it's also not true. It's also just because you can't directly. Well, actually, to be fair, you can. So if I was to sit down now and think carefully about a nice tweet, a funny tweet with a nice picture of my book with a link, and 10 reasons why you should buy it and tweet it, I would probably sell 2 books. Maybe more. And that tweet cost me nothing. It didn't cost me any money at all. So, but beyond that, what things like Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all that do is it's kind of like a war of attrition. So somebody may see a tweet from you and not pay attention to it. Over time, if they've seen over the course of a year 1,000 tweets from you, they get a sense of your voice, they get a sense of your personality. They're familiar with your book covers because you've repeatedly pushed your content out there. Then one day they might be on Amazon and they might see that book cover and they might go, oh, hang on, I've been meaning to check this out because this person has been in my peripheral for a year. And bam, there's your book sale. And then all it takes is for that person to then go onto Instagram and go, I read this and I fucking love it. And then for 5 other people to go, oh, wow, thanks for the recommendation. I might buy it. And before you know it, over the years.
And I think we've all done this, haven't we?
Right?
I mean, like, I definitely have done this where I've seen like a book and thought like, oh, that looks interesting. And then the next time, like, oh, I really should pick that up. And then the next time it's like, screw it, I'm just going to buy it. And then away you go.
Book sales on social media is a long-term thing. You're slowly building up an awareness of yourself and imprinting yourself and putting yourself into the front of somebody's mind so that when they're finally in a position to buy, they're more likely to buy your stuff. And there's a word for that in marketing, and I did all the marketing bollocks years ago, and I've forgotten what the official term is. But, a lot of people give up because they tweet and they go, oh, nobody cares. Or I put a post on Instagram, oh, nobody's interacting with me. Nobody cares. It's like, well, nobody knows who you are. So just keep going, keep doing it. Don't give up. Be dogged about it and consistent. And eventually over time, have faith in yourself enough to know that it will happen. But there's no quick solution to selling a book, unfortunately, unless you're somebody very smart. And I always use Eric LaRocca as an example here. Eric understands so much about himself as a writer and his work and visuals and everything. So he released a book a year ago, I think it was now, called Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, understanding fully the power of a very intriguing, good title. And the cover art was sweet. It was licensed from a particular artist who specializes in stunning, violent, colorful portraits, right? And the cover went viral, and he's now sold over 10,000 copies, and I think it's just been picked up by Titan.
10,000 copies about 6 months ago, so Christ knows how many it is now.
Once you get to that number, it's like, okay, we've done the deal now. It's been picked up by Titan, and it's about to be reissued. Brian Assman is another one with his Man Fuck This House, Again, it's about title and cover.
Title.
isn't it? And
Yeah.
and it went viral, and now
Yeah.
I think he's on par for like 30,000 copies or 50 or
He's
something
actually
like that.
getting like sort of closer and closer to that thing where he has to actually buy someone
Buy
in a
the haunted
raffle
house.
a haunted house. So brilliant.
Yeah, I think he said he was going to buy a haunted house if he sold 1 million copies, and it's just been optioned. So
Yeah.
you know, the idea that social media doesn't work is utter bullshit. It's
Yeah, it
just
is,
you're
it
not
is.
doing it right. So keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about the Eric LaRocca one, though, is it's been picked up and optioned by Titan, and they've changed the cover. And I
Yeah.
think the new cover's good, but
Yeah.
I think the
I
old
like it.
cover's perfect.
It might also be licensing because
Yeah,
the
maybe, yeah.
the artwork for that original cover is based on an original painting, and the artist may have sold it or have
Yeah.
licensing issues around it. So I
Exactly.
think that's quite common. And I also
Yeah.
think Titan like to have their own. Understandably, they want their own version of
Yeah.
the book, so they can own that. And also, people will sometimes buy the same book with multiple different covers.
It's got different stories as well, hasn't it? This new
Yeah,
edition.
it's got
so,
two new.
yeah.
It's got two new stories in it,
That's it,
which I
exactly.
imagine was conditional on them kind of buying
Yeah.
the book in the first place. So.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
On the subject of artwork, though, obviously you are, as well as being a novelist extraordinaire and storyteller extraordinaire, you're also a very, very talented painter and have done a lot of cover design for other authors in the community as well. How do you find you've sort of balanced the two kind of different creative aspects?
So art for me is very much what writing was 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Art for me is a hobby. Writing is now my job. Art is something that I do in the evenings with the TV on to calm myself down. It's quite hard to wind down after writing all day. Your brain is in, hyper focus. I hyper focus on my books when I'm writing them, and the details and the plots and all the rest of it. It's constantly in my head, and it makes it hard to sleep sometimes. So one of the things that I'm trying to do to stop myself from mindlessly doom scrolling for hours and hours on end is to occupy my hands and my brain in a kind of calm, peaceful way. And I've always been. My mum was a fantastic artist, and should have gone to art college, but she had me instead. Sorry, mum. But my family have always been very good with their hands. My granddad, built his house. He was a wood carver. He was a metal worker. He drew. He sketched. My mum was a fantastic artist, and I've always just wanted to make things with my hands. And art, for me, was something that I did for myself. And then when Cruel Works of Nature came out, I decided to do a series of sort of small illustrations for the interior. And people really liked that. They actually really, what was one of the factors towards them buying the book was that they really liked the little title sketches. So I just kind of got, again, into the habit. My art wasn't that strong, really, a couple of years ago, but I just got into the habit of doing it regularly, as you do. And particularly with art and painting, the more you do it, the better you get. You see a very visible market improvement in composition, in color, in technique, in everything. And I sort of started to gain confidence in it. And then I wrote a book called Dear Laura, which, again, I'm quite a hasty person. I don't like to hang around or fuck about. I had this story in my head. I wrote it in little under a month or perhaps 2 months. I can't remember exactly. I wanted to get it out in time for my birthday-ish in June. And I didn't want to wait. So I just painted my own cover and figured out how to do it in Photoshop, had to lay it out in Photoshop, formatted the whole thing myself, uploaded it to Kindle, and boom, off I went. And once I'd done that cover, I realized I could probably do others. So I just gradually started putting the feelers out and doing a little bit of my own stuff. And then people began to commission me when I said, actually, I might open up for commission. And yeah, I really, really enjoy working with authors. I tend to work mostly with small presses and self-published authors, and I can speak to them directly about what they want and what they have in mind. So I ask them what other covers they've seen. I ask them what color palettes they like, what visuals they like, the kind of style that they want. And we work out this kind of overall mood, I guess, and sense and feel. And then I go off and I do like a rough composition sketch. I'll quite often put a composite together in Photoshop from reference pictures, and then I'll do an outline sort of sketch from that, because I'm not a good enough artist to not use reference art just yet. And then the author will either tell me if they do or they don't like it, and then I'll start painting and just see what happens. And so far, people have been very. I've had some really nice comments that at book fairs and things like that, the books with my cover art on have sold before the other ones. So I'm a big believer in color. I also think, with the best will in the world, I think traditional publishing and cover art is quite dull and quite not always, but it relies heavily on stock imagery, which is there's a definite place for, and it's whatever. It looks very slick and very professional, but it can lack a little bit of soul. And I think there's something about a bit of original art on the cover that gives a book something distinctive that makes it stand out, perhaps from something it hasn't. So I try and color's a big thing for me. I try and not do the traditional red, black, and white horror stuff. I tend to do pinks and yellows and blues and greens and oranges and just as much color as possible, and people seem to like it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's Dear Laura was my introduction to you, actually. I remember and that was one I saw just on Twitter, saw the cover, saw someone raving about it, and thought, "Ooh!" I picked it up and absolutely blown away by it. And again, I think that cover was so. Yeah, when you're in the horror community, as we are, you get used to those same sort of covers coming around, and it was so different from anything I'd seen at the time. And I remember thinking, "Wow, that's just so striking." And it's I think your work that I've seen across different authors is very unique and
I think
stands out.
I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier about being comfortable with building your identity. And I think it's very easy to look at what other people are doing, look at other stories, look at other covers, and to be very influenced by that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what often draws a reader to a particular writer is that sense of something unique about them that they can't find somewhere else. And probably the same with art as well. It's a certain style that you associate with that person. And I think a lot of being a creative and being a successful creative is figuring that bit out. What makes you different? What is that thing about you that your friends love, or maybe that you were picked on at school for, or what is that thing that is you that you can focus on, that is the most authentic, I hate that word, but it's true, original version of yourself. And if that is you, then lean into it. That's what I think. Don't be afraid to be a little bit different. You don't have to write what everyone else is writing. You don't have to make your books look like everyone else's. So.
Absolutely. Moving then on to full immersion. So obviously that's the book that you're
to keep doing this.
Absolutely, keep holding it up. So obviously that's coming out through Angry Robot Books. When's it out?
I think September the 13th is the release date.
But available for pre-order now, and obviously we'll
available for pre-order now on the Angry Robot website, also on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all the places, which is a new experience for me.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, nice one though.
We'll have links in all the show notes, but why don't you tell us a little bit about it? And sort of I know you've described it as being slightly autobiographical.
Very autobiographical,
which is definitely something you don't necessarily see so much in horror these days. But why don't you tell us a bit about it?
So, I mean, it's interesting. I tweeted this a while last week. I was on holiday with my family, and my husband was reading an advanced copy of the book. I had pre-warned him that it was very autobiographical because it was the book that I started writing when I needed to work through a lot of issues, and when I was very unwell mentally. I warned him many times that it deals with quite specifically with large areas of our life together and individually. And because my husband and I have been together for 20 years, married for 10. So, we've done a lot of growing together, and we've been through a lot. And he read it in 3 days and put it down. And he just sort of said, "Fucking hell." And then I could see it had had quite an effect on him. And actually, that was an interesting discourse that we had. We had a drink, and I do wonder sometimes, particularly now in the lead up to it being published, if it was the right thing for me to make this a book that lives out in the real world, whether it should have been something just for myself. Something I'm very aware of is that experiences that we go through don't always just belong to us. They also belong to the other people who were part of that experience. He loved the book. I don't think he would change the fact that it's about to be published, but it is something that I wish I had thought more seriously about, the kind of consequences of being autobiographical in your work. And to a certain extent, everything I write is quite autobiographical, but it's implied, or it's only me that really knows how much of it is and how much of it isn't. But it's fairly obvious, I think, with this one, how much of myself I've put into it. So the book deals with a woman who discovers her own dead body one day as she's walking under the suspension bridge in Bristol. And she essentially has to sort of go on a bit of a journey to try and uncover how and why she died. She has amnesia, so she can't remember anything really about her life or who she is or what's going on. And unbeknownst to her, and I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say, she's actually taking part in an experimental therapy procedure, which is being carried out via some quite advanced virtual reality techniques. And that's as much as I will say about the book.
Sure.
But it is essentially me. I when I was mentally very ill, I was dealing with quite delayed and quite profound postnatal issues. I had a very difficult experience when my son was born that was never really identified. And what happens when you have a kid as well, particularly when you're a mum, is you sort of go into robot mode. You go into survival, like look after my kid function mode. You sort of put your own needs and wants and everything in a box for a while on a shelf, because all you can think about is feeding and changing and sleeping, and you go into survival mode. What happens quite often is that a couple of years later, all this stuff suddenly pops out of the box like a jack in the box and hits you, and which is what happened to me. And a large part of my journey in that sense was kind of me self-diagnosing, which wasn't ideal. Nobody really knew what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. My behavior and everything was just, it was traumatic for my family. And eventually I sort of went to my doctor and said, this is happening to me. And he sort of immediately identified that I'd had a tricky experience at birth and pushed me gently towards medication and therapy, which I started to do alongside the writing and stuff. So it was a very difficult book to write. There are some scenes in it that were quite distressing to write. And then the other consideration I didn't have was in traditional publishing, you have to reread your own book about 20 times. There are multiple different stages to an edit. And that is a consideration when you are meticulously reliving your own trauma line by line again and again and again. You never really get dead to it. You don't. It's like, oh my God, here we go again. It was an excoriating process, and I am also aware that the next 6 months I'm going to have to talk about it a lot on interviews and stuff. Yeah. So it is a consideration. It's something that Angry Robot were very aware of. It's something my therapist has sort of said at the time, you need to consider that genuinely, that you're going to have to talk about these things a lot. But if it helps somebody who is struggling, who doesn't really know what's going on, who can read it and go, well, maybe this is me, and maybe I should go and chat to my doctor. I have to be careful because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to lead anybody down a path that insinuates that I know anything about this stuff. I really don't. I'm still learning. But I do think there's lots of things that women don't talk about after they have babies. And that's why they get sick. And if I can help in any way, shape or form start a discourse, start a conversation, open things up perhaps for even just a few people, then I'll be very happy, because I went through hell and my family went through hell, and there was no support for me immediately after having a kid. And I wished there had been. I really wished somebody had said, this happened to you, you might need some support. So yeah, so that's essentially what the book is about. It's about motherhood. It's about parts of postnatal depression that people, again, don't talk about because they're very ashamed of them. It's also a book that I'm really very frightened that my son is going to read one day, because I don't want him to get the wrong impression. I don't want him to feel unwanted or unloved or cast any doubt over his childhood with me. But at the same time, it may help him to understand things a little better when he's old enough to read it. And I'm not going to let him read it till he's about 45. so when he's had his own children, he'll get that understanding. So.
Well, certainly my children have shown absolutely no interest in reading any of my books, even when I've left them in their bedrooms. So I think you'll probably be all right.
Actually, my kid is writing his own book at the moment. He struggles with what we think is ADHD. He's going through a referral process at the moment, and possible dyslexia as well. So he has this awful thing where he can't really write particularly well, but he's incredibly verbose and his ideas are incredible, and he reads like mad. So he's a storyteller. And he's writing his own story at the moment, and I'm almost, I sort of encourage him to do that, and he's very proud of what I do. He's always coming to me with ideas, and mummy, what about this? And his ideas are fucking awesome as well. I need to start paying him royalties soon. The kids' imaginations are just wild. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, obviously that'll be coming out in September, and then have you sort of got things in the pipeline for what's next and next books? Are you working with Angry Robot more, or?
So you asked me earlier if I was interested in self-publishing as well. The thing with having an agent is that obviously your literary agent wants your books out there in as many different places as possible. So self-publishing probably isn't going to be on my immediate horizon for a while, because everything I write, I send to my agent. But the next part of my journey is very much, I find myself for the first time in years without any huge crushing deadlines. So, which is a glorious position to be in, because I can return to writing for me and writing for fun again. And so I've just finished a novella, which has gone to my agent, which may or may not find a home, who knows. I'm currently working on an old book that I started writing in 2015, I think, or maybe older. And I've just rediscovered it. It's 64,000 words. I'm not going to waste that. So,
this is the mystery, the traveling mystery one, book.
Yeah.
Yes,
so,
yes.
I mean, I'm lucky enough that I've travelled quite widely, and I have so many vivid memories of different countries. And this one is set in Vietnam, and the reason I never finished it is because I didn't know enough about myself as a writer to do it justice. And I've suddenly rediscovered the manuscript and gone, shit, I know what I can do with this. And I know what to do with the characters, and I know how to resolve it, and I know what my voice is. So I'm now going back through, and hopefully I'll be able to send that to my agent. I'm working on a collection of travel themed horror stories as well. I've got a lot of travel themed stuff in my head. I am working with a screenwriter and a small kind of indie film production company on a treatment of Dear Laura, a movie treatment, with a view to hopefully one day being able to write the screenplay for it. But it just depends on, it may or may not ever come to anything.
That would work fantastically as a film.
I hope so. And yeah, in my mind, I see it as a very intimate kind of indie production. And I just want to I want to move into writing screenplays. I've been obsessed with the movies since I was a small kid. Basically, I've probably got about 4 or 5 novels that I'm working on simultaneously this year that I want to send to my agent, and then we'll see what happens. And I want to do more cover art. I want to do screenplays. I want to make movies. I want to
all the stuff.
Do podcasts. I want to do all the things. There's only so many hours in the day.
Brilliant. Can I ask, with the mystery, is that horror tangential, or is that going to be something quite different?
It's more of a crime thriller, I would say, with horrific elements, like
Okay.
perhaps like Dear Laura.
Yeah.
I have an appetite for crime and true crime.
Crime fiction, not actual crime.
Yeah, well, crime fiction. I grew up on a sort of diet of Mo Hader and Birdman and Lindsay Davis and her kind of Roman Empire detective novels, and it is just something that I've always really wanted to explore in a bit more detail. I'm enjoying it enormously. One of the characters are very much based on myself and V Castro, who's kind of my bestie, and I think it's a dynamic that really works well for me. And I hope I don't fall out with her at any point. That's going to be really tedious. And she's got a new book coming out, by the way, that everybody has to pre-order. And it's the new Alien IP novel, and it's
What's
based
the title
around,
again? What's the title?
it's based around the character of Vasquez.
Vasquez, that's it, yeah.
And it looks fucking incredible. So
I
everybody needs to
absolutely
get
can't
on
wait.
that.
Can't
And
wait to wait.
V's an absolute bloody powerhouse.
She is an absolute machine, and
Yeah.
I'm very inspired by her. And we
Incredible.
have a very good relationship where, this industry can be tough sometimes, and we are a very we support each other. And I think in general the community does that. But I'm very fortunate to have sort of found V. So
Awesome.
yeah, I have lots of things that I want to do, but nothing that I can definitively concretely talk about, except for a novella which is coming out with Cemetery Gates Media next year, tentatively titled either Thomas or The Once Yellow House.
Okay.
I'm really going to let loose with that because it's not traditional publishing. It's indie because Cemetery Gates and I have a good relationship. It's kind of my tribute to Cronenberg.
Ooh.
It's going to be cosmic as fuck, and I'm very much enjoying it.
Wicked.
It might be quite sexy as well, so
very
which I've not really
exciting.
explored much so far yet. But
So sexy cosmic body horror, that's something to look
yeah,
forward to.
pretty much, yeah.
Amazing.
Well, I'm very just aware of taking up too much of your time, especially with all these projects that you need to do. But I don't know if Kev, was there anything else you wanted to ask before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, we've asked all the other people that we've had on so far to kind of, what would be like if you had to condense your creative knowledge and wisdom into like a statement to give to other would-be creatives or current creatives or aspiring creatives out there. What would you say?
What I said at one of the panels at ChillerCon, which is just fucking get on with it. Really, in a nutshell, nothing's going to happen unless you do it.
Yeah,
I can't think of a better place to leave it than that, really.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for giving
Thanks
us
so
your
much
time.
for your time. Yeah,
No,
really
thank you.
appreciate
This
it.
has been great fun. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Well, wasn't that a great conversation?
It was fantastic. What a lovely, lovely person. What a fantastic creative. And full immersion, as mentioned in the throughout the podcast, is out next week. So if this is coming out on the day that I'm hoping it will do, which is the 7th of September, it'll be out a week tomorrow, a week today even. So go and pre-order it now from Amazon or Waterstones or wherever you get your chuffing books from, because it's going to be absolutely fantastic.
It is absolutely.
Yeah. So,
very exciting. So before we disappear, I mentioned before the show about the autumn and being a new period of creativity. So what have you got lined up creative wise for yourself in the next couple of months?
Quite a bit actually. I've took a complete break from sort of doing anything creative for best part of 2 months, which is the first time I've done that since I started writing my first book, Blood on the Motorway. So it was really, really good, refreshing time off. But I'm back now. I am going to continue back up with my sci-fi serial, The Sunset Chronicles. So currently that's been an ebook only book so far, and that will be the newest episode of that will be Series 3, Episode 2, and that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But excitingly, I'll also be launching paperback versions of all of the individual episodes, and they'll be as dirt cheap as you could possibly get away with. And they'll be available from Amazon and your local favourite bookstores. So hopefully I'll have some shiny copies to show to the video viewers next time we have a conversation.
So is that like little chapbook?
Yeah,
type
yeah,
thing?
they're going to be. They're about 120
Oh.
pages. So
Nice.
each season has 5 episodes. So it's a sci-fi horror serial. It's set about 120 years into the future, on a sort of vaguely dystopian kind of hellscape. Probably not that dissimilar to the nightmare dystopian hellscape we currently live in. But it's got everything. It's got space monsters. It's got telepaths. It's got evil corporations. It's got laughs and scares and thrills and spills. So if you're into that,
Nice.
go check out the first episode. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And hopefully by the time this comes out, it'll be available. That first episode will be available in print as well. So that's that. And on top of that, my podcast Bleakwood, which I believe you've got a story coming up on quite soon. Yeah, so that's coming back as well in the next few weeks. So I'll probably be able to speak more about that one next time. But if you haven't added Bleakwood to your podcatchers, that's a kind of a folk horror, British sort of compendium of little scary tales. So yeah.
I strongly recommend it. Not because it's got my story in it, because that hasn't even been on yet, but the stories that have been put out on it so far have been terrific. Some absolute crackers in there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, it'll be coming out. Be moving to a monthly show. I think one of the key takeaways I took from this kind of period of rest is that I need to maybe slow down a little bit on trying to get quite so much stuff out. So yeah, that's going to be
like rest shouldn't be like a 10-year event.
Exactly, yeah.
Rest should be a bit more often.
Quite possibly. So so that's moving to a monthly show, and the next episode will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So if you haven't checked out the first 4 episodes, go and do that now. And how about you, Kev? What's been going on with you after your summer of hard work?
Well, yes, I've been working a lot at university in the UK for the last 7 weeks. So this week I'm mostly relaxing and sort of plotting some ideas together for how things are going to work in the autumn and winter. But this Sunday, I'm going over to France, and on the following Tuesday, I'm going to be heading down to a place in Brittany to do some on-site research for the first book that I'm writing in this for unconnected folk horror novellas. And so that's a little place called Le Tranchet. And I'm going to be driving down there and going into the forest and seeing this very interesting Neolithic stone site, which is apparently still, according to the locals, used by fairies.
Ooh.
That might mean that those people are crazy, but I'm still going to exploit that idea to get some scary folk horror out of it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, and I'll be putting some videos up on my TikTok and my YouTube and stuff like that for people to have a look at while I'm doing that research, just to kind of share that process with people. So I think it should be quite
excellent.
fun.
And of course, if this is the last time we ever hear from you, then we'll understand why, because you've gone and joined the fairies. So
I've been abducted by fairies. Bloody hell.
But those 4 folk horror books, you've got a home for them already, I believe, if that's right.
Yeah, that's on a contract with Lichen Valley Press, who put out my first novella, The Balance. This one is going to be, like I said, set in southwest France with some fairy folk. And the second one is in the north of Portugal. And it's the first book I've written set in the country where I live, which is exciting. And it is about a solstice festival that happens every winter solstice. And there was actually a short story in my collection, Paths Best Left Untrodden, which this is going to be based around. It's going to be an expanded version of that story, because I think there's a lot more story to tell. So yeah, I'm excited to get cracking. Really, really thrilled to be getting back to it.
Yeah, it's good to be good to go back to the writing and good to go back to the well. Yeah, excellent. So okay, well, we'll be back in hopefully in a couple of weeks. Fairy abductions notwithstanding, and in the meantime, go check out Gemma's book and have yourselves a very creative few weeks.
Thank you for listening.
Cheers. Bye.